Okay. And like I said, this is, because all your projects are slightly different, you may have individual questions and there are caveats, but let me share my screen. Okay. Again, this is to make you think that I have a presentation. But it's worth knowing, like I put this little subtitle on that says tracking and sharing your project accomplishments, because really, like, yes, reporting is a thing that you need to do because it's the thing that I need to do for DEQ, right? Ultimately, I need to be able to say for the watershed fund, look at what we've accomplished with this money. And then I need to report that to DEQ so they keep giving money in the future and we can keep funding these projects. Like, that's true. But it's also an opportunity for just sharing what you've done on your project and for keeping track of things. I think I'm not going to say like, yay, grant reporting, because I would love us to just give you money and you never have to report on anything. But the reality is, like, you want to be able to show for your host site for the future what you've accomplished on your project. And you want them to be able to go back and be like, oh, was this project a success? Was it not? What did you do? Why did you do what you did? It's just really helpful for everybody to know what's going on with the project. And so we can see what went well and what didn't go well for the future. So for all those reasons, we all, including myself, do grant reporting. And this is literally my one actual slide, just because I didn't have it anywhere else. But this is all you all received that email from me in various stages because your project processes have been different. But at some point when I said, congratulations, you've gotten funding, there was this big long email that was like, but here's all the things that need to happen first. And this is just kind of a condensed version of that. Hopefully you all still have that email and can refer back to it. But the first thing that needs to happen is for your landowner agreements to get signed. That does not include Natalie, because Prickly Pear Land Trust owns the land. And so just by signing the funding MOU, they're agreeing to these things. And then it also doesn't apply to Kirsten because her project is slightly different. And those basically homeowners along Patty Creek are going to sign those later, like getting them signed as part of her project. But for Ellie and Angelo, you need to get the landowner agreement signed. That's the next step. And then we can sign your funding MOUs. And once your funding MOU is signed, which again, Natalie's, I think, is the one that, oh no, Kirsten's is already signed. Natalie, we're still waiting on. But once your MOU is signed, you can start work. But by work, I mean planning and prep work, like any kind of planning you need to do. You can buy things, you can recruit volunteers, you can publicize the project, anything like that, but you can't do any planting or actual on the ground work until you do these other things, which are agreeing to those Endangered Species Act requirements, which we don't even have yet. Megan's still waiting on those. And they're going to be pretty, I mean, especially for Patty Creek, they're going to be very minimal, but even for your other projects, I mean, they're pretty minimal projects. They're basically going to tell you to do things like, if you see any carcasses, report them. If, don't leave trash around, don't camp at the site. Like, I would be surprised if there were any like really problematic things, but you do need to see those and agree to them. And so once I get those from Megan, I will pass them on to you. And then the other thing that I feel like could get lost because we haven't talked about it as much, but it is in your MOU. I think all of your projects should at least require a 310 permit from your local conservation district. They may require others. Sometimes they might require a permit from, gosh, I'm forgetting my agencies. Anyway, it's escaping. But if there's like wetlands involved, I don't think that applies to if you were doing like low-tech project-based, process-based restoration structures. I don't think that applies to any of you guys. It should just be a 310 permit, but again, your host site supervisors, they're going to be the ones who know that. So whatever permits you need for your project, you need to have those in place. And then I just need a copy of them and you can message me and submittal with those. Any questions about those things before I keep going? Okay. But yeah, just that reminder that even when your MOU is signed, you can't do the like digging and planting things until the ESA, you agree to the ESA requirements and you send me your permits. Then all the on the ground work can begin. And I think all of you are basically planning to do that in the fall. So we're good. We have a good amount of time for that. And then just reminders that once that your interim report is going to be due August 8th. that could be before you do any on the ground work at all, and that's fine. Just report on what you have done. And then your final report will be due November 1st. Both of those reports, you'll have the opportunity to ask for reimbursement if you have spent anything. Usually it's pretty minimal. And then the final report, you'll be requesting reimbursement for the rest of the project. And then anything else before I move on? And so next we are going to look at, thank you, Ellie, I did not warn you about this, but we're going to look at the Bitterroot Water Partnerships MOU, which is pretty much exactly the same as you guys', except for the amount of funding at the beginning, right? And hopefully you've all actually read this. It's not nearly as long as some funding agreements, I swear. And just that reminder, like your scope of work is at the bottom. That's basically what you're going to be doing, and therefore what you're going to be reporting on are those attachments. Oh, also just jump in anytime if you have a question, because I'm just going to go through this. So just unmute and say something, or raise your hand, or drop something in the chat. So yeah, it has the amount of your award, has that reminder that the attachments at the bottom, and then it has those things that I just said, right? Consult with the Fish and Wild, DEQ will consult with the Fish and Wildlife Service, and you have to agree to these things. And then you also have to, any permits. Authorizations, I don't know that there are any additional authorizations in you guys' case, but you and your host site supervisor are going to know that better than I will. That reminder about the match funding, that you have to have that 40% match, which you all, sort of estimated you would have in your budgets. There's that formula again, which is, I always forget the formula, which is why I write it everywhere. And then you have to complete your interim progress report before August 8th and the final before November 1st. Or sorry, oops, I messed that up. You have to complete project work by November 1st. Final grant report is due November 4th. So to give you, ideally you'll just finish everything before then, but gives you a little bit of wiggle room. And then this is a little loop, but it's like, if you have any tours or educational events related to your project, it might be something we want to share on social media, might be something we don't generally publicize local events that aren't like of interest to a statewide audience. And I know you guys are publishing things or publicizing things to the other members in terms of volunteering. But if there's something that you think would be more, you don't have to tell me about everything that you do, but if there's something you're like, hey, this would be great for you guys to share in MWCC's social media, feel free to pass that around. That would be great to know. And then this thing, I just wanted to highlight this because it's one of those, I feel like it's a little annoying, but there's so many agencies, there's so many organizations involved in this, and it is a pain in the butt sometimes to be like, all 3 of these help fund this project. In addition, you may have other funders, but wherever you can, it just helps. It helps publicize the Watershed Fund because we're trying to get more money for it, and it's also just a requirement of DEQ and the EPA that you kind of say. And so you don't need to do that in like social media posts, but if you're making a poster, if you're doing a video or a blog post, it's just like, just have at the end that, these organizations helped support this project. And if there's something visual where you'd be using a logo, you should all have access to the folder that's linked here. So you can use those logos. Of course, you can also look up other DEQ and EPA logos online, but there's copies there if you need them. This whole, press release or blog, it's funny, we talked about this recently. It was like, oh, should we update this wording? Do people do blogs? Should we include like social media things? But basically, just if you guys feel like you want additional help on publicity or anything, let me know. I don't think I will in the past, and I guess this is to plant a seed. We have had in the past members write a blog for the MWCC newsletter about your project, if that's something that's of interest, or if you're doing that for your host site anyway, let me know and we can maybe get that in Watershed News. And then, yeah, if you can't complete the project, which hopefully does not happen, you basically have to notify us in writing. So like an email saying this project's not going to happen, and then we're going to have obviously a larger conversation. These are all the legal things that hopefully your host site supervisor is on. I think all of you guys work for organizations that have the insurance and liability things you need. And then again, this will be eventually signed by everybody. and then your scope of work. And this is just the reminder that as some of you know very well, your original proposal is not necessarily what's in this MOU. Like in a lot of cases, changes have happened. We've asked for changes. Things. So you're not reporting on that proposal and submittable. You're reporting on this scope of work, and specifically, right, the tasks, deliverables, timeline spreadsheets, and your budget, how much you've spent. And then you guys all have, I won't show it unless you need me to show it, but you all should also have that actual spreadsheet of your budget and the actual spreadsheet of the tasks and deliverables. Does anybody have any questions about the MOUs in general, or about your MOU in particular and what you need to? Okay, cool. So now I will go into, so my personal submittable account is weird because I rarely apply for anything in submittable. I'm usually accepting applications, but this is roughly what your host site or your submittable account is going to look like, all the things you've applied for. And hopefully you all know this by now, right? Like you just go to, I was just going to do this one that, if you click on this particular application, all your messages are here, which is where, just to remind you that when you get your permits, you don't have to, you could just email them to me, but it would be ideal if you could send them to me as a message in submittable, because then I've got everything there. Also shows your awards, like how much funding you've been awarded. If you forget, it's also in your MOU. And then it's also where all your forms are going to be, right? The additional, your reporting forms are all going to be in additional forms. Hopefully you guys know that already, but okay, still no questions. I know this is a very exciting webinar. All right, and then just the interim reporting form. So the interim and final are similar in that they both have these instructions at the beginning. And one of those things is, I can't remember who I was talking with about it, but we're talking about the, oh, actually, this is Aleda who has the cost share funding, but what to charge for your in-kind match for volunteers. And so if you want it just to be easy, you can use the independent sector's rate. But if you want to spend a little more time and probably have more match, you can go with what you would actually pay for that service by difference, or, it's going to cost. I mean, even somebody planting trees, honestly, if you contracted for that, would probably be more than this. But certainly if you're working with somebody from FWP or a local school, or like, their time is probably going to be, or almost certainly going to be, more valuable than that. So if you're able to track different billing rates for different things, that's great. If you're not, and you don't need the extra match, you can just use that standard 2887 for everybody. And then just a reminder that there is this FAQ document. You may or may not have lost it in all the emails, but it is linked to both of the reporting forms. And so if you have questions, pretty much if you have a question, it should be in your MOU, or it should be in this FAQ document, or your host site supervisor should know. And if you can't find an answer there, then give me a call. But yeah, this has, I'm pretty sure we went over this, or I shared this in the original webinar if you were applying, but basically there's just links to all kinds of resources in here. And the one that I wanted to remind you of again, because I acknowledge that our budget spreadsheet is not fantastic for actually tracking what you're spending. That match is on the, I noticed recently this doesn't have page numbers, but it's on the last page. And that match tracking spreadsheet is great for tracking your own match. You could also use it to track your actual spending on this grant too. You just make a page. And if it's helpful to you, you can just add, I guess I'll show the spreadsheet just to remind everybody. Yeah, so this is Christine's, like, this is what she's budgeting, what she's estimating she's going to use for her in-kind match. And then this is her actual tracking, where she was like, okay, on this date, we visited the landowner and spent 2 hours with her. And this is the billing, right? And she just used, I don't know where she got that rate from, but that seems reasonable to me. And then that's your total. So you can just go through and it's really helpful. Just anytime you work on this project, just put in the date, put in what it happened. And you can do that. You can create a separate sheet for your actual spending on the grant too, right? Your actual, like like in Ellie's case, I think this is paying for some of your host site supervisors' time to work on this. For I think all of you, it's paying for you to buy trees or seed mix or weed fence or weed matting. And so you can just track this is just a really simple way of tracking everything. And I would recommend just making a second tab here, making the second tab your spending of the actual grant funds. So you'll have one tab for your match and one tab, and then cash match is separate, right? So if you have not all of you have cash match, but if you have cash match, you could do a third tab for that. And if it's helpful to you to include that in your as like additional tabs in your actual budget that you have to submit, that's great. But it is just a simple way of tracking everything. Do you guys all feel like you have a good way of tracking your spending on this grant as well as match spending from your host sites or elsewhere? Okay. Does anyone feel like I still don't really know what I'm doing with this and this feels complicated? Okay. I mean, luckily you all work for people who do this all the time. So that's great. Yeah, I don't think we need to look through Ellie's budget. That's fine. And so I think just gonna go to that reporting form and answer a few basic questions. Yeah, most of this is super straightforward, right? You're addressing each task in the project implementation details section of the scope. So just go to your funding MOU, what's in there. This is super, I feel like spelled out but just cut and paste directly from there. Be like, okay, here are the 5 activities and here's what I've done. For your interim report, there's probably going to be a lot of, and sorry, for some of you, see who has, Angelo, you have the cost share funding also. Ellie, do you? I can't even remember now. Do you have cost share funding too, or only this? Okay. So it's just Angelo who's like heard very similar things before. But it's similar to that cost share funding where you can literally just cut and paste those 4 activities or 5 activities for each task. And you'll have to because you all have multiple tasks. So you could literally just be like task 1, activity 1, and paste it in and then say, probably for your interim report, it might be work not yet begun, or it might be in progress. And if it's in progress, just say what you've done. Just a sentence or 2, unless there's something complicated. If for some reason there's an activity that's not going to happen, but the task itself is still going to happen, right? In the case of, this feels like a good place to actually go back to the MOU. So let's see. Ellie's, I'm trying to think of something that like might not happen, but the task will still happen. Yeah, let's say you get out. So your task 2 is removing past project materials. Let's say you get out there and you're like, actually, we left a lot of this fencing because we found that the deer were really browsing really hard, like some other trees in the area. And so we decided to leave this stuff on. So just, say when you just when you're reporting on that, just be like, actually we only removed 1,000 feet of past fencing and we decided to leave the rest up because of this reason. That's fine. If there's something that you end up not doing that like impacts this happening, I'm trying to think of a good example, but like if you just decided for some reason to not do this at all, give me a call and let me know in advance. Like something that's going to really impact the project, I would want to know about in advance. But if it's something small, your numbers change. We had, 32 volunteers instead of 40. That's fine. Just have a line to say how that changed. And so I'm sorry, I forgot this grant doesn't have activities. So it's just deliverables. And then task 1, you'll just want to say that's where you put whether it's complete, in progress, or not yet begun. And again, a sentence or 2 about it if needed. And yeah, kind of place to the anticipated deliverables for each task, and then share briefly what progress you've made in achieving them. Pretty much what I've just said, pretty much everything I just said. And then it's worth pointing out the Endangered Species Act thing. You don't know this information yet, but when you get that email from Megan, and you'll just have to verbally, I think you just have to respond. Megan will tell you what you need to do, but I think you just need to respond to the email and say, yep, we can do that. That's fine. The easiest thing to do is to keep that email on hand or paste it somewhere that's handy and just paste this in here and say, like, we did all these things. Again, in some cases, there might be something really specific where you'll have to say, actually, we found a carcass that looked like it had been cached by a grizzly bear. FYI, like, that's things that they would want to know, right? If there's something unusual that happens, yes, put that in there. But in general, you're just gonna be like, cut and paste. Here's what we were told to do, and we did these things. The rest of these things should be fairly self-explanatory. I can go back to them if you want. But this is the interim, so there's not as much. So you'll notice the interim report is fairly short, because you probably haven't done too much work on it yet. But in the final reports, again, you've got those same instructions and everything at the top. But the one thing I wanted to share, yeah, you'll have to do the ESA thing again, which may be exactly the same. And again, the final report is cumulative. So you can cut and paste from your interim report and then just add, just be like, and now this deliverable has been accomplished, this deliverable has accomplished, this task has been accomplished, and share how it was accomplished. Share, and if you end up doing something additional you didn't expect to do, if you have, yeah, share all that too. But the extra thing that you'll have is related to those emails you've been getting from Megan about the load reductions. And this is different for all of you. For some of you, and I can't remember who at this point, but a couple of you, she said, well, these aren't going to have this project is not going to have a major impact on, the actual pollutant, sedimentation, phosphorus, nitrogen, that sort of thing. And so this is, like, it's going to have an impact, but it's going to be small and not that measurable, and maybe more of a habitat impact. If that's the case for you, you can just cut and paste from her email and be like, this is what Megan said. I am not, like, I have nothing to report. If she told you, like, I know at least for Natalie's project, maybe some others, she was like, we do need this specific information from you. And so again, it would be helpful if you could cut and paste that email wording in there and then say, and here's the information. In some cases, you might need to also provide a map, or additional photos. And if that's the case, you'll just upload those in your I'll get to that later, but you'll upload those. There's a thing that is for your deliverables. And so if you're required to submit an additional map or photo or something like that, then just upload it with the deliverables. But yeah, that's the one thing that's a little different for everybody. And just remember, this is on your final report, but not your interim report. So it might be like easy to forget about, but if you can, just gather that data at the beginning and end. Yeah. Questions on this? Okay. And then everyone's favorite, I don't know, my favorite, because it's just a bunch of check boxes. But this is another thing that you're going to want to track in a spreadsheet or somewhere, because this is not, you have your deliverables, right? So many volunteers recruited, so many trees planted, things that are specific to your project. But these are the things that we use for the Watershed Fund to be able to, like, if you see our annual reports or things we publicize, we'll often say, like, 8 miles of stream restored this year, or 20,000 community members engaged through Watershed Fund funding. So this is our, like, standard, what we use to report for all the grants. And that's why they're so specific. And some of them might not apply. Community partners engaged is all, hopefully you are engaging some community partners. You will just check all the boxes that apply and then do the total number. Again, I feel like the amount of instructions I have in here is almost ridiculous, and there's a lot of words, but it's basically just like, one community partner is one individual or one organization, right? If you have like 3 people working with you, from your conservation district, it's just you just count the conservation district. You don't have to count each person. But if you have volunteers who are just individual people from your community, you can count all of them. We had 13 volunteers come out. So that all will and also do not, a lot, it happens every year where somebody's like, oh, like the Bitterroot Water Forum. And I'm like, well, the Bitterroot Water Forum is not a partner. You're the lead on this. So we're talking about organizations you work with. Also a note about your fellow Big Sky Watershed Corps members, because I know probably some of you, maybe all of you, will have other members come and help you with your projects. You can totally count them as volunteer hours, as match. That's great. But unless they actually live in your community, they're not community partners. So just don't count them here, but you can count their time for match. Conservation practices. I feel like some of these we've tried to be really specific. A few that get confusing is like riparian management improvement. Some people will be like, well, we planted trees, but these are specifically related to grazing. So like Natalie's project, you actually might check this because you are doing grazing related things. But it's okay. I mean, just check what seems best to apply. Don't, it doesn't need to be a stretch. If you only check 2 things, it's fine. But you're certainly all doing, I think all your projects involve multiple of these, so you should be checking a few of them. The total number gets a little complicated. Again, I guess I'm just going to keep using Natalie's as an example because you have 3 different sites, but most of you just have one. Well, and also, I mean, Kirsten, in some ways, your project will be, they're all sort of along the same stream in a very small area, but you'll also have different landowners. And so, it just depends on how you want to report it. Like for Natalie's, I would say for sure you could say, if you are doing riparian planting along 7 Mile and riparian planting along 10 Mile, you could say that's 2, because that's 2 separate riparian planting projects in 2 separate spots. Kirsten is kind of, I mean, they're so close, right? Yours, maybe you just say 1. I'm not super picky. The biggest thing with these is just not to exaggerate. Like I'd rather have you underreport a little bit than overreport. But also be realistic. I mean, you're actually going to accomplish a lot. Like you'll be surprised by the numbers in the end. So if you're like in doubt, just read this example. You can always give me a call or shoot me an email, but just your best guess of how many total of these conservation practices. Does this make sense? Okay. Acres made more resilient. Hopefully you guys are all, well, there's 2 things. Hopefully you all, I think it's in most of your proposals, like how many acres you're going to impact, like how many acres you're actually planting in or putting up fencing around. But there's also that, like, some people would argue, well, you're going to impact a much larger area in some ways, right? Because stormwater runoff or whatever. But for these projects in general, if you can make a good case for like, oh, this is actually going to impact 100 surrounding acres, but for the most part, you're just going to be reporting on like how many acres did you actually plant in, did you actually do work in. If you think there's a good reason to extend that, yeah, you can up those numbers if there's a good reason. And yeah, you'll just check what kind, like were you in forested land, are you in cropland, rangeland, and then again that total. Stream and lakeshore miles approved is probably the most straightforward, because if you're not, yes, you're all actually working directly along stream. So you just have to measure, how many square, and we do ask for it in miles just because of the way we report it. But a very, sometimes it might be 0.01 miles, and that's fine, but just turn your feet of stream bank into miles. All the rest of these are pretty straightforward in their narratives. A lot of it, especially in the final report, is going to ask, like, what did you get out of this? How was this helpful to you? Did you learn anything? And then there are a couple of questions for your host site supervisor. We do expect that, you just have them email you a response and you can paste it in, or you can give them the password to get in here if they don't have it already. Communication stuff. We ask for, a lot of people will just upload a Word document with links to some posts you did. I don't need to see all your social media posts. If you want to include a few that were great, but mainly bigger things, flyers and videos. And, if you get an article in the local paper or the local TV station, and then photos. And this is kind of, oh wait, is this in? hold on, did I skip this in the MOU or did I not include this? But hopefully I've communicated about before and after photos. I'm gonna kick myself as this is not in here. It is not. Huh. Well, whoops. I guess that's my fault. So I guess that's wild that that's not in here because I feel like it always is. So I guess technically you don't have to do this, but I really hope you do because I need these photos. Um, yeah, wow. Okay, that was a mistake on my part. Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna now explain this here because apparently I didn't put it in the MOU. I'm sorry about that. But photos, before and after photos are really important, not just for us, but also for your host site. I mean, some of you, I know Kirsten, actually, all of you, all four of you are working to some extent on past projects or you're building off of existing work. And hopefully, your host site already has photos of like what it looked like 3 years ago or 2 years ago before you did any work. And if they don't, you should start now because it just tells a story. Like when you're trying to get funding, when you're trying to get grants, you can say, look at what this stream bank was trampled by cattle and now like all this vegetation has regrown and they have offsite watering and there's like there's a grazing management plan or this homeowner used to mow right up to the stream bank and now there are all these this native vegetation. Like you want to be able to tell that story for all kinds of reasons. And so having really good before and after photos is just a great idea and also actually required for this. Gosh. And so when you're taking those photos, I feel like it might be in the FAQ document. I swear it is somewhere. Hang on. There's actually some websites that show good ways. And if that's not, I think it's in the FAQ document. If it's not, I will send you guys a link. But right, in the old days, we used to just like you would take a GPS, and you would find that GPS spot, but then you would take a photo, you would have like a photo, like you would print out a photo of like what the last photo from last year or 2 years ago, and then you would line it up. You'd be like, okay, there's that tree, there's that peak, there's that telephone pole, and you would line it up and take the photo. There's apps that you can do it, or other ways, but basically you want to take it from the exact same spot and the exact same direction, right? Like take a compass bearing so that you're showing the same thing every time so that you can say, okay, I installed this beaver dam analog 2 years ago, and then somebody can go back and look at it and see how the creek has changed. So when you're doing it, we also like to see photos of like people, volunteers working on projects. That's great too. But those before and after photos showing here's what it looked like before, here's what it looked like now. Even though sometimes it just looks really dug up because you're not doing a long-term project, but we still just want to see here's where we planted things or whatever. Yeah, does that make sense about repeat? Do you guys all know? Have you ever taken repeat photos before? Anybody? So nobody had, yeah. So just talk with your host site supervisor about how to do that. Hopefully you've all done that, but you'll want to take photos before you start work and then after you're done. You don't need to take any in the middle unless there's some reason for your organization, but right, just, and usually it's helpful to have a few looking upstream and a few looking downstream, depending on how big your project is. You might have like 4 photo points or you might have 15, but just, GPS it, get your coordinates, have the same spot, and then take it from the same direction. So you can look at, here is all the plantings looking upstream and here are all the plantings looking downstream. And you have that exact same photo from before you planted. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah, and I'm gonna change that. It's weird. I have this memory of like including the links and everything, and apparently I did not. And then also important, and this is I mean, all of this is like partly for me, partly for you, but keep track of who took the photos, and also keep track of what's happening in the photos so that you can just, you'll have however many photos you have, and then you can include the captions. And I just asked because you're also going to be uploading documents for your deliverables. Most of your deliverables, I'll pull up the Bitter Water Partnership again. I think most of them are just going to be numbers. Oh, well, at least 10 photos, right? So that deliverable is also just going to be under your photos. Planting. Oh, okay, like you said specifically, you're going to write a blog post on this. So that's in your deliverable. So we'll just want a link to that. Before and after photos, that'll be in your photos. Gather quote, like, yeah, a link to that video. Anything that you say in here, you're gonna create. Whether it's a report, maybe it's, your baseline reporting data, like those are the things that you will want to upload here, any documents that are part of your project funding deliverables. Obviously, your deliverables that are 150 native plants, you're just going to say how many plants. No way to attach plants in your files, but those things will go there. And then here you'll have the list of all the photo captions and the document captions and descriptions for each. So if you're uploading a blog post, or just say, Word document with links to all of our publicity, that can be your description. And then when you have a photo, you could say before photo number 1 taken by so and so showing Bear Bank, after photo number 1, like number them, like for each photo point. If you have 5 photo points, number them 1 through 5, 1 before, 1 after, 2 before, 2 after, and then just describe briefly what you're seeing, and then also who took the photo. And the who took the photo is important for us because there's a note at the top of this that, like, if anything you submit here, we will often use to publicize the Watershed Fund and your project. So if there's something that you don't, if it's like, this is sensitive, please don't use this photo for, the link, for whatever reason, just let me know that, and we won't. But in general, we might use your photo in a newsletter to say, hey, look at this cool project that we funded. And it's just nice to be able to say, Ellie Ross took this photo, instead of just saying the Bitter Water Partnership. So that's just it's just a nice thing. And, your volunteers, like, if one of your volunteers takes a photo, it might be nice for them to be publicized. I don't know. So, again, another question for your host site supervisor. And then for the final report, another thing you don't have to do for the interim is re-upload your budget and all your receipts. So I'll go back to the budget in a second, but for your receipts, we don't, and it pretty much says this in here, it says all this in here, but you don't need you don't need to document if this grant is paying for your host site supervisor's time to help you on this. Mileage, we don't need to see mileage logs. We don't need to see hourly breakdowns. Unless you're asking for some ridiculous amount of money, like we're just gonna be like, okay, yeah, that's pretty much what you asked for in your budget. 15 hours of supervisor time. You're just gonna write that in. Anyway, that'll be in your budget, which I'll get to in a minute. But anything you actually purchase, right? If you're buying equipment, if you're buying plants, if you're buying fencing material, anything you're actually buying, we need the receipts for all of that. And then you'll also, and I know for a fact that all of your host sites have an invoice form. An invoice is just for what you're spending this reporting period. So if you say you spent $500 for the first reporting period, like for that interim report, and then the rest of it before the final report, those invoices are going to be different, right? You're going to invoice us $500 in your interim report and $4,500 in your final report. But your budget is going to be cumulative. Does anybody have any questions on that? Yeah.
You're saying the invoice upload in the final report is not cumulative. It would just be.
Yeah, it's just, and I actually, that's something that I think there's an invoice for both. There should be an invoice upload for both of them. Let's see if I messed that up. No, in both of them, because you might spend money before you're into, right? You might spend money on this before August 8th. You might buy, you might buy pliers or who knows. And so that you would say I'm now in the interim report, you can't tell, but you would upload like what you've spent during that reporting period. And then when you got to the final report, it would just be an invoice for what you spent that reporting period. Because it's an invoice, right? You're basically saying, this is what we spent, you need to pay us back for it. But then you have to show that on your budget, and your budget will be cumulative each time. Does that, I don't know if that's super clear. Okay. But yeah, the invoice is just per reporting period. So that's the one thing, I guess, it's just like everything is cumulative, but not your invoice, because it's going to be and again, some of you, in my experience, most of you won't actually invoice us for anything. You won't even, you will, is this record? Yeah, for the interim. Yeah, for your interim reports, anything with a star is required, right? Because you have to show us your budget, like what have you spent since, or have you had any match funding, or have you spent nothing, but you have to upload your budget again. But there's no star by the receipts in the invoice, because we recognize you may not have actually, you don't have anything to show for that. So, but yeah, just ask your hotel supervisor, because they will understand these things, that like you're going to invoice for what you've spent just that reporting period. And then in both, and I forgot, for both of your reports, you need to upload. And then and this is basically going to be in your invoice or your budget, all of these numbers. How much are you requesting for reimbursement this reporting period? What's your cash match to date? What's your in-kind match to date? What's your total match? And this is basically just for my report. It just makes it so I can run a report in Submittable and not have to look at everybody's spreadsheet. So you do have to put it in there. And then feedback for us, like that's always helpful for me. If you're like, this question was really confusing, then I can fix it for next year. Or put that we have to do before and after photos in the MOU. Just anything that is going to be helpful for the next person. Same with this. How long did it take you to complete this report? If you're tracking things all along the way, I mean, your interim report shouldn't take you more than like an hour or so. Your final report will take longer, but the more tracking you do along the way, the less time. Like every once in a while, I'll get something from somebody being like, this report took me 5 hours. I'm like, oh God, that's terrible. But it's usually because they were like scrambling to find all the things that they needed to report on. And so I do want to go back briefly to, again, I guess, showing Ellie's budget. Is that okay, Ellie? Do you mind if I show? I mean, I don't think there's anything proprietary in there, but I did not ask your permission first. So. Did I close it? Okay, but just to go, as you all know, there's this, the main thing that autofills. Don't fill out anything there. The formulas are already there. Just fill things out in the tasks. I think you all know this. But this is the budget. Like basically, this is the budget that essentially Ellie and I and Megan agreed on. Like, oh, yep, this looks reasonable. And it's got all these things in here. And so when for your interim report, right, maybe, I don't know if it's Heather or Alex or like who's working with you more on this, but maybe, you said project oversight, $600 total. So you guys have all your details in here already. I don't need a total rehash of I'm just assuming that this is more or less what you're going to spend, but you can just update it to say like, okay, we've spent this many hours, just like maybe this accounts for, I don't know how many hours of Heather's time, but maybe she spent 5 hours on it. And so that's what you're saying. This is how much you've spent so far. So, sorry. So this changes from, instead of this is what we're proposing to spend, and you can even change the heading if you want. I never really thought about this, but this is no longer going to be funds requested. This is going to be like what you've spent so far. And so this is the part that'll be cute. Like we asked for 600, but we spent 200 so far. But yeah, this number might change to 200. But then at the end for your final report, it might actually be 600, or it might be $650 and you end up spending less on materials. So these numbers can change. I think that's the biggest thing, is that this in the end is going to be what you actually spent. Right now, it's what you proposed to spend. But in the end, it'll be, this is what we actually spent. And so it might be different. Like it happened, like I would actually be surprised if it wasn't different. It might be that materials and equipment were more expensive than you thought they were going to be. And so you had to just spend less on personnel. Oops, screen sharing thing keeps popping up away. And then, yeah, same thing material. Like this just might be different. Like, oh, maybe we ended up going out to the site one extra time, more times than we thought. So the travel is higher. And so we spent less on something else. And that's fine. If it's within, the general rule is if it's within 10% of your grants. Like if the total for like personnel, so let's see, if your LEO grant is basically $5,100, so 10% of that is $510. Is that it? Or is that like 1%? I gotta hold on. Math. Yeah, $510. So basically, if you shift around more than 510, well, $514 within these categories, let me know. But anything less than anything less than 10% of your grant, you can just shift around and it's fine. Yes, I'm trying to think if there's anything else on that. But again, if these things change, right? If you're like, oh, we thought we were going to have all this volunteer time, but only 2 volunteers showed up. So, that's going to be mainly in your deliverables, actually, in that case. But you might just want to make a note. Like we had less in-kind match. You don't have to recreate this because I still have your original. Like I can always go back to your original budget, but you can just say, oh, we had fewer volunteers than expected. So we had less in-kind to match here, but maybe you had more in-kind match for this task or more for materials and equipment. So just make those notes when things change. Okay. Questions on that? Okay. That is pretty, I'm going to look really quickly at the final reporting form, make sure I'm not missing anything. But yeah, I just feel like most of this is all, like, I don't need to go through every single question. It's mostly self-explanatory. The ones that I went over are the kind of the ones that generally, can be confusing or different. So I am gonna, oops, yes, I know. Yeah, so I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for a minute and just see if you guys have any questions. And they can be questions about where your project's at or the process or anything at all.
Yeah, I guess I had questions about planning. Like, can that process be kind of our own methods and
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, you just need to do what you say you're going to do in that MOU. And then, yeah, I assume, yeah, you guys work differently than the city of Missoula or, And do you mean, I guess in terms of planning, you mean just like how you plan the project?
yeah, like if you wanted us to eventually give you our plan or something and I don't know.
No, no, yeah, I think that's, yeah, however you want to get the work done, as long as you're getting it done. And luckily, like I said, all 4 of you work for organizations that have done projects like this many times, and they generally know what they're doing. And so, generally you're going to have a template for your invoices. You're going to have, a way of tracking your spending that, you can use that match tracking spreadsheet. That's great. But your host site might have a better way of doing it or a different spreadsheet that works better for you. So just use whatever works. I just need to have that proposed budget back showing what you've actually spent in the end. Yeah, and that's kind of it. I mean, and I'm excited for all these projects. They're great. Like all of them. And I think it is cool that I don't think we've ever had a year where every project is building on previous work. And that's, I don't know how that feels because it's not like, oh, I'm starting this project. Maybe that's slightly less, but it's actually kind of more exciting because you're really like the impacts are sort of becoming cumulative and becoming bigger. And that's really exciting to see. So I hope you guys feel good about that and good about getting out into the field and not just working on grant reports all the time. So yeah. Anything else? Okay. Then I will again send you my apologies for not including before and after photos in the MOU. And there is a link in some other funding agreements that I've done that shares a little bit more about before and after photos, and I'll send that all out to you guys with the link to this recording. And then as always, we'll be in touch about, because no one's MOU is signed yet except for Kirsten's. But yeah, we'll all be in touch one way or another about all the other steps. Cool. All right.
Thanks.
Take care, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you.
You.